Lawrence Hartnett's home for over 50 years. Within these walls, Sir Lawrence dreamt that Australia would have their own car. And this is it, the very first Holden, prototype number 1. Sit back and enjoy the restoration and history of the car that started it all.
The new Australian automobile, designed and tested by General Motors Engineering Department under the direction of Mr. C.L. McEwen, Vice President in charge of engineering. It was developed especially for manufacture in Australia by General Motors Holden, whose staff had prepared a comprehensive commercial specification based on extensive surveys of the Australian automobile market.
To that first door then. Towards the end of the 1944, the Defence Department were closing down on contracts for defence work, and as a result of this, people like General Motors had to find alternative employment for the people that they had on their staff. And as part of this, Hartnett wanted to pursue his idea of building a car in Australia, and he engaged the technical department in developing a motor car suitable for the Australian market. And as a result of this, we made an analysis or an investigation in the market as to what sort of a car the Australian public would want. And we came up with a specification which was basic really. It was a sedan body, a 6-cylinder motor, because of the poor experience we'd previously had with 4-cylinder cars in the country, and seating capacity for 5 or 6 with a bench seat in the front. And following this, we then proceeded to build several 3 cars with the features incorporated that we thought we wanted. And following this, of course, Hartnett's next problem was to convince the directors in New York that Australia could make a car. And as part of this initial study, we prepared studies on the economy of the country, the manufacturing facilities, the education facilities, in other words, to give the American people a comprehensive view of what Australia was all about, because to the Americans we were just in the back block somewhere without any capacity to do anything. When Hartnett finally convinced the directors that we could make a car in Australia, or that they would give us permission to make a car in Australia, they said, well, you are not going to design the car, we are. We'll set up a group here in America and we'll design it. But the other problem that Hartnett had was that he had to, even though the directors had given their permission to make the car, they sent him off to the finance committee to arrange finance, and the finance committee wouldn't advance any money for him. They said, no, you're on your own. And then Hartnett came back, of course, and he was on good terms with Chifley, and the Chifley government said, well, we'll put £5 million into it. And then Playford, who was Premier of South Australia, he said, well, we want to be in part of the Act, and they put in 500,000, so that the finance part of it was fixed. And then when the design group was set up in America of a small group of American designers, the Americans said, well, you can send 2 or 3 of your young engineers over to America and work with the design group here and get some experience. And that's when Hartnett selected me as one of the members to go to the States, and I went over there in May of 1945, March in 45, and I sailed. In those days transport was difficult, and I sailed in a motor vessel called the Chibasa, which was a British India line, and it took us 6 weeks to get from Sydney to Vancouver. Of course, in those days, towards the end of the war, the Japanese were still involved, and we had to zigzag our way across the Pacific. When I finally arrived in America, I was introduced to the chief engineer, Russ Begg, and he immediately introduced me to the members of his own staff, and from that point on, I was just a part of the working team. Working in detail design, of course, on the whole car, we had to produce drawings and information enough for people to make components, and whilst we had some standards to base our design on, it was virtually a soup to nuts job, where we started with nothing really and worked into a proper design. But one of the features that I didn't mention earlier, which was important in the design, was that it was to be a low weight, or as low weight as possible, so as that we had a good power to weight ratio, and secondly, it was to be in fairly low cost, so that we could compete in the marketplace on a cost basis. And working from these yardsticks or parameters, we developed the car based on the experiences that the design engineers had with building a small car in Germany a few years prior to this. And as we produced the designs, these were sent to the experimental shop to get the parts made, and so that it was a progressive job, where as we designed parts, we had parts made. Now, this was in the interest of saving a lot of time, and also one of the the yardsticks laid down by the directors was that because of the time involved, we were not encouraged to use any novel features. We had to use standard designs. As we completed the design of the components and finally had them built up, of course we finished up with three prototype vehicles, which we proceeded to test at the proving ground at Milford.
Every test must be accompanied by a weather report, and General Motors maintains a complete official government weather bureau for accurate recording of temperatures and atmospheric conditions. A small electric generator is connected to the wheel you see attached to the rear of the Australian car. Accurate miles per hour are calculated from a voltmeter indicating the output of the generator. The fifth wheel checks the other four. Operation of an automobile in America involves distances and terrain similar to that of Australia. And here, on the 1,268 acres of General Motors proving ground, are miles and miles of every known type of road. A place where engineers are unhindered by traffic regulations and tests are conducted without danger to the general public. This new Australian car has simplicity and beauty that does not require an excessive ornamentation. The car has a turning diameter of 37 feet. Check on the results of a gasoline test. Reasonably high performance and fuel range are essential requirements. This is facilitated by the low curb weight of the car, which is 2,200 pounds. Brakes are tested by devices which tabulate driver's effort, by analysis of the linings, by photomicrographs of the drum, all for establishing facts about the all-important subject of safe stopping. The washboard road provides a test for stress in the springs. The Australian car passes over the famed Belgian block pavement on its way to one of the many special hills of the proving ground. This is at 27% grade. The car climbs 27 feet for every 100 feet of forward travel. A hill this steep is rarely encountered in ordinary driving conditions. And this six-cylinder valve and head engine literally lifts the car over the hilltop. The General Motors Speedway is the finest test track of its kind in the world. It is a specially designed speed loop nearly 4 miles in length. Each of the 4 lanes are properly banked for their rated speed. Here, vital statistics on car operation and performance are accumulated through continuous day and night driving. The Australian car takes to the high-speed lane for an engine performance test. It is powered by a 6-cylinder, valve and head engine with a displacement of 132 and 1/2 cubic inches. It has a bore of 3 inches with a 3 1/8 inch stroke. The engine has an SAE rating of 21 6/10 horsepower, producing 54 brake horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute. There are 52 engine revolutions per minute for every mile per hour of road speed. From designing boards, from thorough research, and from rigorous and exacting tests made at proving grounds, General Motors Engineering, through commercial specifications supplied by the staff of General Motors Holden, have produced this new automobile for Australia.
We put the cars through fairly comprehensive tests, but only for a limited time because there was no time to do lengthy tests. And these were shipped to Australia with the in the Wanganella with the rest of the crew that worked on it. And when we arrived, of course, with them in Australia, they were used by the manufacturing department and the engineering department to build up the details for our production vehicles. This, of course, occupied roughly 2 years' work, and then we had to, with the prototypes also, we put them through a test run. We had a test facilities or roads mapped out up in the Dandenongs and around the country generally.
Over winding mountain tracks to prove maneuverability and handling qualities. Through heavy dust on rough bush tracks. In driving rain over slippery roads. Over potholes that would test any car's springs. Through mud and water on unmade roads. And then a minute examination. The production of this car is a triumph for Australian industry. It has to have everything national conditions demand. All-weather performance, speed, comfort, high mileage, reliability. Hundreds of men gave it their brains, their skill, their labor. They tailored it to the measure of this wide land. The birth of this car is the birth of a great new industry. Cars not only for the Commonwealth, but for export. Jobs for thousands of workers. By the end of 1949, a production rate of 20,000 cars a year will be reached.
To run these cars 24 hours a day to prove that they could stand up to 30, I think we had 35,000 miles as a baseline to start with without any major troubles. And they performed very well in this category. And also the final weight of the car was worked out pretty close to our design of 2,100 pounds. Of the 3 prototypes, the 2 of them were destroyed. The company policy was that they were all to be destroyed, but somehow or other one of them slipped through the system, and it was purchased by Arthur Ling, who was a foreman in our patent shop. And he had the car for a few years, and he sold it to a dealer down in Morwell. And that's the car that has now been restored beautifully, and of which we've recently conducted some tests on, which was an excellent example of workmanship and skill in restoring a car that at that time was, 55 years old. But in spite of that, its excellence is evident when you witness the component parts and the condition they were in when they started to rebuild the car. And this, I think, is a credit to the workmanship of the Strongman father and son in creating an historic masterpiece, I believe.
My association with No. 1 Holden began through my brother's friendship with Mr. Bill Vickery of Lakes Entrance, a marine engineer. My brother was a very keen fisherman, and he formed a strong friendship with Bill, and in the process of their association, Bill expressed a desire to replace his old, rather beaten up Holden. My brother said, well, that's okay, we'll certainly look up a decent vehicle for you, and that happened in due process, and Bill received an FE Holden sedan, and my brother arrived back in Morwell from Lakes Entrance with a fairly battered looking car, which was nothing out of the ordinary, so it was pushed out the back because it was hardly worth taking into the body shop and removing the rust, which there was a plentiful supply. And it wasn't until some months after, when we received the ownership papers from Bill, that we realised that this was something special, as it was registered according to the ownership as a Chevrolet, and they were built accordingly. General Motors had to pay for a 29 horsepower, 29 hundredweight registration fee. That was subsequently changed when they named the car Holden. When we got this information, we contacted Bill, or my brother, who was associated with him in fishing, and advised him that this car was the first Holden built, and we wouldn't know what sort of a value to assess it with this knowledge that we now had. Bill's reply, as I remember it, was that if you boys are satisfied with the deal, I'm very satisfied with the car I got from you. And that was that. The car was tidied up over a period of time. It was a sort of a spare time job. We thought we'd better tighten it up a little bit, and it subsequently went to Sydney, to the Royal Show, the Motor Show in Sydney, to Stack & Company. And after it had been up there for a month or so, it came back, and to my horror, it had been repainted a different colour. The upholstery, which when we first got the car was leather, was now trimmed in cloth, and really the owner of Stack & Company, who was a personal friend of mine, Peter Lloyd, he thought he'd done a great job doing this, but I was horrified when it came back in this new regalia. However, it was put aside for the time being, and we had at the time working for us in the body shop in Morwell a chap who was a lecturer in the Law and Technical School, and he approached me one day and said, I'd like to get No. 1 Holden and take it out and make it a project for the boys doing the course in panel beating, etc. I said, well look, as far as I'm concerned, when it is restored, it's got to be restored to perfection. So I don't want any cheap approach to it, and I will pay the going rate. So on that basis, it went out of our possession to the Illinois Technical School. Now, time goes by very quickly, and I was pretty heavily engaged, not only in business, but in overseas trips 4 or 5 times a year, representing Australia in the Federation Aeronautique International. And on one of my brief return visit home, I thought I'd better check up on number 1 Holden. And in the meantime, I'd moved to Mount Eliza, left Morwell, so I phoned a nephew of mine and asked him to go out to the technical school and check up on how this car was going. He rang me with very disturbing news to say that it was sitting in an open-ended shed. It had been buffed down to the bare metal, which had gone into rust, and everything that could be undone or pulled out had been removed from the frame of the car, thrown in a box. Well, that was a real body blow. The chap who'd worked for us had since left. The school principal knew nothing about it, so there was nothing much could be done except to go out and pick up all the bits. My nephew attended to that, and he brought it down to Mount Eliza, and subsequently, due to my friendship with Kevin Harrison, the Holden dealer at Chelsea, the car was taken up there and stored. At this stage, I realised that I had to do something positive about getting number 1 restored. I also was absolutely certain that I could not attend to this myself, and I had been approached by a few people who had been interested in number 1 and had seen the car at Harrison Holden, and several offers were made. I wasn't terribly interested in the amount of the offer, but I was very interested in what sort of a result would eventuate and whether or not the project was likely to remain in this country or not. And I was down at a friend of mine who ran a repair shop, Ian Gardner Motors, and he introduced me to Gavin Strongman. And Gavin expressed great interest in number 1 and arranged to come and talk to me with his father Graham, and also invited me around to their business premises to look at projects that they had worked on previously. And this was a very important part in my decision making, because I realised that Gavin and his father's ideas on restoration and their attention to detail coincided with the way I felt this car should be this project should be tackled. And sitting here in the finished product now, I can only say that they have exceeded my most optimistic expectations.
This car, I believe, was purchased from Arthur Ling.
Yeah, Arthur Ling was the sheet metal expert, and he kept it for quite some time. I think it was sold twice before these people got it.
Well, they bought it from somebody in Frankston. That bought it originally from Arthur Ling, that they'd had it in the garage and they weren't using it, and the Strongmans found it and they bought it. I think it was in pretty poor shape.
It was very poor shape when they got it.
Yeah.
They've done it fantastic.
And they've pulled it all apart, panel by panel, and all the mechanical components. So they overhauled the engine and the gearbox. I don't know whether they did it all themselves or whether they had somebody else doing some of it for them, but they've got a good workshop. Yeah. And they do these things in space.
It was a labour of love, and they just...
Yes, but they've done a marvellous job. I think it's very good.
It handled okay, it had a bit of a nylon tyre bump in it, but other than that, it rode beautifully and quiet and good car. Went well.
Yeah, well,
I'd buy it. The price was right.
as a passenger in the back seat, I thought it was excellent. The ride was, and the noise that I didn't think was objectionable at all. But of course, we're driving it on a smooth surface originally. You know, we had all sorts of rough terrain to drive over.
Yeah,
You wouldn't hear the noise so much then. No, I thought it was excellent.
Yeah.
I think it's a
and a good performance, a good turn of speed.
Yeah, yes, we were doing 60 at one stage.
And it was still quiet,
60
miles an hour.
miles per hour.
Oh yes, that's right. It's the old odometer, you know.
I hope you enjoyed this insight into the restoration of the world's first Holden. It may not be a V8 supercar, but if it wasn't for this, who knows what I'd be driving.